Welcome back to Careers Explained. Today, we're talking with Dr. Sam Robinson about his career path and current role. He graduated summa cum laude from Furman University with a double major in history and philosophy and received his master's degree and Ph.D. in history from the University of California, Berkeley. And he's currently a content design manager at PayPal. Welcome, Dr. Robinson. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, thanks so much, Heidi. And I think this is the first time in like a month someone's called me doctor. And so I'm just already flattered.
Hey, you did
um,
the work, you deserve the credit. You have a PhD, you are a doctor.
Indeed. Yeah. It's funny. I do put it on like some things where it's sort of like my TSA known traveler number. It was like Dr. Robinson, but my dad's actually a physician. And so, and his dad was a physician. And so at least I've kept it going. I don't know
There
anything
you
about
go.
medicine, but technically they can't pull
Oh,
that doctorate away from me.
got the title, keeping the bloodline tight.
Yeah, indeed.
So can you start by telling us with that doctor title, why you were interested in getting a PhD in history?
Part of it is or was that my family's history was very present in my life from the moment I was, a kid. Our my dad's side of the family came over to North America on the Mayflower in the 17th century, and so it was just sort of rooted in. It was just sort of in the water that I was growing up in. Often we could go home and we sort of learn about sort of the past and early colonization and English history and European history. When we were growing up traveling around the southeast where I grew up, we would often visit Civil War battlefields, and so it just was breathing a lot about the past. And being in the South, there's so much both very violent and awful, but interesting and useful things to learn about the area that you're growing up in. So just this was around me a lot, and so I was generally interested in it, and kind of had this idea of wanting to be a teacher. My mom was a Spanish teacher, and so just that as a career path, I had models for it, like just at home, and thought that's what kind of wanted to go in that route of like thinking and working around knowledge more generally. And so I had this idea of it, even though I didn't really fully know what it was, and just kind of got ingrained in that pathway of taking a lot of history courses in high school, and then when I got to college and undergrad, this was, I think I was thinking of double majoring in an English and history, and then took an English class, didn't really like it, took a poli-sci class, didn't really like it, took a philosophy class and loved it. Thought it was sort of life-changing and shattering to think about big ideas and the way the world works, and the way the most smartest people in the world have thought about like what is basically like that kind of stuff. I found really fun and cool. When I finished, I had a double major in philosophy and history, and actually thought I wanted to go to grad school in philosophy at that point because I thought that was like it was really exciting. It was where I found, I had no idea what it meant to do philosophy really, coming from an undergrad perspective, because I could take like, oh, I like reading about Foucault. I like reading about Richard Rorty. Like, sure, I'll just write about them, not quite understanding exactly what it means to produce knowledge and not just like write papers about the books that you're reading. And so I applied for. I took a bit of a jam year because I graduated in 2007, and then the bottom fell out of the economy, and so I was like working at retail running shoe stores for a year or so, actually a couple of years, and applied to a whole bunch of philosophy graduate programs and didn't get into any of them, but like one in New York. Went and visited that one school in New York and realized this probably isn't exactly what I had envisioned. So I pivoted and reset. Actually did this like long walk along Battery Park down in like southern Manhattan. Like, do I really want to do philosophy? And then decided I didn't, and then ended up applying to a whole bunch of graduate programs in history. And like, okay, well, let's go back to what I was like originally interested in and think about how I might take some of the interests that I have with philosophy around ideas and maybe think about this in the historical context. And so ended up applying and getting into University of California in Berkeley in 2009. And then I was in grad school for like 8 years.
And so going back, what was the driver? You mentioned kind of at the beginning of that you wanted to be a teacher. Was that on your mind when you actually went for your PhD?
I think a little bit of it was so I wanted to be a scholar and I wanted to be an intellectual and I wanted to be, I had some very vague notions of what that meant. Um, but I think in terms of if I had to try to like, I think if I like think back and if I had an idea of what it might be, I thought it was similar to what a lot of my professors did at Furman, which is like a lot of lecturing and a lot of like truly teaching and grading. And I just thought that was like a cool way of being in the middle class. It was just like teaching ideas and sharing knowledge with others. I didn't know, and I wonder if I had known this, if I would have made different choices, that a lot of that job you don't see from the perspective of being in the desks in the classroom. I mean, all of the research, all of the conversation, all of the conferences, the generative aspects of work in the humanities was not that clear to me. As a 15-year-old, absolutely had no idea. As an 18-year-old going to school, kind of began to get a sense of it, but then finishing up as an undergrad, still didn't have a strong understanding of what it meant to sort of not just sort of understand and learn knowledge, but actually create knowledge. So transitioning into graduate school was a challenge. It was hard. My first couple of years were rough. They were rough. But I learned a lot and learned a lot about myself and learned a lot about the field and learned how to write in different ways, learn how to think in different ways. Got to be around really smart people, people who are much smarter than I am. And that was both good and hard for me.
After your PhD in history, I think most people would assume that you probably would have kept on with that path of maybe being a teacher or
Yeah.
something in the realm of history. Instead, you now work as a content design manager at PayPal. Can you explain how you got to this current role?
Yeah, I think it's two forces. There's a force that pushed me out, and there's a force that pulled me out. And I'll start with the pulled out. Um, I don't know, like honestly, if I really should have gone to graduate school. I think it's one of these things where I got a little path dependent, and it's like this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do, and so I'll do it because I want to do it. And that became a little bit of a circular logic of continuing into the field itself. I think that happens with a lot of folks who are like you. All you know is school by the time you graduate. All you know is school. You maybe you've worked a job, maybe you haven't worked a job, but all you know is your classes and your study. If you are motivated, you're probably doing pretty well at those, and so you get all this positive reinforcement if you're doing a good job at school. Like, hey, I make A's in my coursework. I'm good at geology. I'm good at political science. Like, surely I should just keep on doing this thing that I keep getting rewarded at, not knowing that actually like the job of being a political scientist is pretty different from being, a student, especially an undergraduate student of political science. So there was this aspect of it where I don't think constitutionally I have the ability to sort of focus and work on like one problem for 4 to 5 years, which is what you really need to do in order to be a scholar in humanities. Just like I'm going to wake up every day and like think about this like really deep, challenging topic and all the different facets and the contours that I'm just going to delve down as deep as I can into this and understand more about it than anyone else in the world. I'm more of a generalist and I kind of flit in between things. And so I had not that I struggled with the dissertation, but it was a challenge for me to figure out how was I going to find a topic that was going to intervene in this existing field and these existing conversations. Academia itself is a conversation. It's a discourse between scholars. It's a debate within how we understand the way the world works, whether that's like in terms of sociological disciplines and field or historical disciplines. So in my field, I I had to spend a lot of time like learning what some of these debates were. And then I always struggled a little bit to figure out where my work fit within it in a way that matched my own interests. And I think I sort of pigeonholed myself into a field where I don't know if truly my interests were in a lot of the like religious and intellectual stuff. I just kind of fell into it and then became a little bit path dependent in it. So I never really woke up or like woke up in the morning like, I can't wait to jump back into this. It was always a bit of a grind. And then I think culturally, there wasn't a great fit either. Not that there was anything wrong with the people I was working with or with my advisors. I just don't think that I never felt quite comfortable in the spaces of academia. It's I don't know. It's hard to explain in a quick way, but they're professional knowledge workers in a way that is different from maybe any other field. It's kind of the closest thing we have to a secular priesthood, if there's a way of putting it that way, where it's very vocational. People talk about the life of the mind. And yet there are still all of these market forces that are operating around the field. And the market forces are what pushed me out, where in the sense that it's not so much a job market anymore in the humanities, it's a job lottery. There's such a oversupply of PhDs and an undersupply of tenure track jobs. It's very difficult to get a job. I think my last year, I decided I was going to go all in on the job market, and it was going to be my last shot at it. And I think I must have spent months, like 3 months, where basically I was spending 6 to 7 hours a day just applying for things, putting in like all the personal statements. And it's a lot of work just to apply for a postdoc. And I applied to everything I could on both sides of the Atlantic. I think I got like 2 first-round interviews, one for a job at the University of Alabama and another for a postdoc at Stanford. And I was preparing for the interview at Alabama and hated it. Like, just like basically you just have to explain like, why is your work important? Which is another way of saying like, why are you important as a scholar? And I so struggled to answer that question. And I was like, I don't actually know if I can answer this, if my work is that important, if I'm making like that generative of an intervention in the field. And I found that incredibly despairing. And so when I didn't get anything after that, like any job offers at the end of that, which wasn't too surprising, I just decided I was going to move on, and I wasn't quite sure what that was going to be. But just that making that decision to, let's just say quit, let's just call it what it is, to quit, felt like a burden just rolled off my back when I did that, because all of this weight, all of this existential, like, this is your path, this is where you're going, to make that call, like, I don't quite know where I'm going to end up, what I'm going to do next, but I'm not going to do this. And so I just let it go. And it felt good. It felt like the right call. When I was, so throughout undergrad and graduate school, I've always been just writing. You write as a part of the work. You write as a part of your dissertation. It's a book essentially. And then I would also just did a lot of writing on the internet. Like, I grew up on the internet, and I love writing on the internet. It's been the medium of my life in a lot of ways. And then beyond that, as I was like finishing up, I started thinking about, are there ways in which I can think about like what networks do I have to begin to flex a little bit, to like share my writing, to figure out what other opportunities are there that I might have around to do this kind of writing. So I did some freelance writing. So I just basically got in contact with editors at different running magazines, because I had this sort of running background. Like, hey, do you need like any like, do you need someone to write some stuff for you? I had some friends who worked for a few companies in the area, and just was like, do you guys need anybody to write some marketing content? And just kind of freelance a little bit and pitch some things and flexed my network, leaned into interests that I had outside of academia. A lot of that was oriented around distance running, because I've grown up and been involved in the sport of running from high school through college. And so that became a little bit of a niche. And so I did a little bit of writing for Outside Magazine, Trail Runner Magazine, a few other outlets, did some writing for a few like outdoor companies that are based here in the Bay, some like nutrition companies, and then some gear companies. It built up a little bit of a portfolio, but nothing full-time. And so I was like searching for full-time work. I was thinking, like, oh, I'll become a copywriter. That sounds like something I can do, is like write copy, whatever, writing for money and health insurance. That sounds fun. And but struggled because I had this weird background. I think I might have sent out 200 or 300 resumes and put in that many applications. So it was a grind. But just kept kind of connecting with people, having coffee with people. Ultimately, there was a client of my wife. She worked for PayPal, and my wife mentioned, "Hey, my husband's like looking for like writing stuff to PayPal. Have any writing? Do any stuff?" And she knew our content design team's managers, and so I set up an informational interview with Marcella, who's now a director at PayPal, the director of marketing at PayPal. We had a little informational convo, just chatted, like no low stakes, not looking for a job, just want to learn about what you do and like learn about like what your company is like, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Everyone's willing to have a cup of coffee and chat for 15 minutes about, you know, what they do and what they want to do. So like I think informational interviews are such a great way of like having those conversations if you're thinking about wanting to learn more about a field, or do a pivot, considering doing a pivot into something different, or just want to learn about a company or a role. Everyone will have a coffee with you. And Marcella very, very gratefully had a coffee with me, or at least we had like a phone coffee. I'm not quite sure. And ultimately, she put me in touch with the folks who were hiring for a few roles in the content design team, which I can explain in a little bit of like what that is if you want to know exactly. But that is ultimately how I got there. Did this like transition from the ivory tower to a tech company, essentially. That's how I got working for a financial payments technology company.
So now diving ahead into this role,
Mhm.
can you give a brief description of what a content design manager does?
I'll talk about like what content design is, because that's probably the best way of explaining it. So our work is there's a lot of different words now for what this role is: UX writer, user experience writer, product design writer, content strategist, content designer. And at our company, we use the term content designer mostly for like purposes, because that's kind of what the larger field more generally at tech companies are using. So we create the most of the internet, not all of the internet, but a lot of the internet is just rectangular boxes with words in it. Let's use an example of, let's use a payments product example. I'm sure you have a bank account. Do you have a bank account, Heidi? Okay. And you most likely have to log into that account, right? Um, Put in some sort of credential, put in some sort of password or some way of getting access to it. All of the language, there is language essentially that prompts you on how to do that. Like, where do you put your email address? Where do you put your password? Let's say you forget your password, right? How do you go about doing that? All of that is being prompted by language, and it's a product experience to help you retrieve or create a new password. Um, all of the language that's in those interfaces is written by someone who does a job like mine. So they're a UX writer. They're thinking very much about how do we functionally help a customer or a user, hence the user experience, get through this task that they're trying to create. And so a lot of the skill sets are obviously writing skill sets, but the writing tends to be less around like marketing copy, more around what information does a customer need to know that will help them do the thing that they want to do. And that's what our role is. And so I manage a team of 5, soon to be 6 writers who create and work with user experience designers, user experience researchers, product managers, and engineers to help build product-based experiences for any sort of financial service kind of tool. And so that role is often helping build the actual product itself, because most of our web products are language products, for lack of a better word. They're just bundles of language that we are interacting with and moving through and trying to use in order to do things on the internet. And so a lot of the work is very collaborative. We work with folks who have like more of a design background than a writing background to try to mock up what we call flows of experience. So we use design tools to create sort of like actual layouts of different screens that a customer would sort of move through in order to do a task or to complete some sort of event or to do something. Let's say you want to transfer money from one bank account to another bank account. Well, you need to be able to connect those accounts somehow, and you got to learn how to input different forms of data. And maybe there's security concerns. How do you make sure a customer understands that their data is going to be secured? What if they have questions? What if they need help? How do they go get that help? All of those things. And like, who are these customers, by the way? So asking those sorts of questions of like, how does someone get here? What can they do? What are the business goals? Why are we trying to do this? And are there any particular guardrails around this particular experience? Maybe legal guardrails, regional guardrails, cultural guardrails you should think about. If we're creating an experience for Mexico, do we need to think about word choice that will resonate with customers in Mexico? Are there legal constraints in this market that we need to consider? So it's almost like a question asking job. I would say it's like 90% meetings and question asking and 10% actually putting words into an interface. And then usually those words, you'll do a lot of rewriting and writing and rewriting of those words. There's a lot of feedback in the job, both from things like qualitative customer research to more quantitative survey data and metrics about whether a product is succeeding or failing based on what the company goals are. So that's the job, is sort of web experience writing. So we don't try to, unlike marketing, we're not trying to get people to use the product. We are the product in a lot of ways. It's sort of the way I kind of differentiate it from, like an ad you might see on social media or Google. Once you hit that ad and move into an experience, then you're starting to deal with language that's usually created by a web product writer or user experience writer or content designer. So that is the work. And as a manager, it's just middle management stuff. It's like organizational alignment and hiring and making sure everybody on my team has what they need. And a lot of that is pretty similar to like anybody who's been in the job with middle management. The challenges are like the same as anybody who's been in the job.
So you put yourself in the shoes of the customer, trying to give them the most seamless, kind of frictionless experience with your product, whether it be with, in your case, PayPal, kind of financial. Think of the questions so they don't have to ask it, have everything ready for them.
Yeah.
And can you talk about what an average day looks like? You mentioned 90% meetings, some of the roles that you do around research. Can you give kind of a general description of a typical day with what roles you're doing?
Sure. I'll like put myself like both in the management like role, but then also I'll pretend I'm doing a little bit of like role of an individual contributor. So you might wake up in the morning, and because we are a global company, that might start a little early, it might end a little late. So I'll just say it's a really busy day. And my first call starts at 8 in the morning. We're mostly still in a hybrid mode right now at PayPal. Where we're going into the office, but I would still say 85 to 90% of the work's happening remotely. So your first call might be at 8 a.m. and there could be people on it in 8 different countries calling in from around the world. It's nighttime, probably in Bangalore, India, where there are some developers and a product manager. And you're working on a project that is in mid-flight, and you are sharing out some design work that you've been working on with your UX design partner, who has a Figma file of these different designs where you've been adding work in. And you're sharing that work out to the engineers. And the engineers are asking questions of, is this feasible? Or what exactly are we trying to communicate here? What's happening when a customer taps this button or clicks this field? But you and a product manager are explaining it. There's a director from some other country who's giving you some feedback around the language. Like, are we sure this is the right term to use? And so you're taking notes and you're like, I'm not sure. Let me think about that. I'll follow up. After that call gets off, let's say it's a Monday. And so you probably have some status update call that you have with maybe some other folks on on the UX design team that you're a part of. And so you'll be in a call and you'll do a roundtable of like your big priorities for the week, or things you worked on last week, places where you might be having some challenges and you're blocked. Maybe you need some help from a manager or somebody else. Hey Lonnie, I do need like access to this file. Can you give that to me? Or I'm having trouble with this legal review. Can somebody give me some tips of like what to do here? Or we're blocked with this project, and I'm going to need my manager to like lean in and come to this call, and we to help create some alignment and agreement about next steps forward. After that, maybe you have a research session that's for some project where there's maybe it's like for a few hours you might be sitting in and watching as customers are interacting with a prototype of something you were working on with with your product partners, and you'll watch customers. A user experience researcher will like you're sort of like the person behind the mirror, like in the interrogation room. Imagine that in sort of a digital world, like you're watching and they don't know. It's kind of creepy sometimes. Like everyone who goes through this testing consents, but like with the shift to things being more remote, there might be like 20 people watching one person try to like buy a pair of shoes. And so like you're like behind the glass mirror and you're like watching them do this, but you're taking notes like, oh, where are they having challenges? Oh, they do not understand like what was trying to be communicated there. We're gonna need to like go back and revisit that. As a user experience researcher, is sort of prompting them through some of the experiences for this testing that we're doing. Once that wraps up, you probably have a little bit of lunch or something. Hopefully, you're eating, and then you might have like a one-on-one with your manager, and you might have just a long conversation about like, okay, here are the things I'm working on. Like they might want to do some uh, like dig in a little bit on an experience and maybe give you some feedback or some inputs. They might elevate some things you're doing, like, hey, you've had these goals to like work on this aspect of your work, how you're doing with them, and some status updates more generally in terms of career growth and sort of job work. Um, then you might have like a roundtable, like a UX roundtable of sorts, where like all your peers in the design team get together for an hour and someone brings some work, and then you get a chance to like look at it. And so like maybe a few of your friends on the team are presenting something that you're not working on, but they just want to get some feedback internally from the team for like design best practices, and like again getting outside of your own head a little bit to give you some inputs. And people have different levels of experience and knowledge. And anyway, even the most experienced person needs to get feedback on their work. And so they share out some work, and then you see it and you give them feedback. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Or what's that? What's up with this thing? And then you get off that call, and maybe usually we're supporting more than one product, and so you have like another like alignment call with folks where you're giving some status update. Inevitably, you'll have like at least one call that's really tough that you're a little bit nervous about, where there's like maybe a lot of friction on the team. And so maybe you're having this sort of call like, okay, like let's figure out like what our working agreement is going to be as a team. And everyone's kind of like talking about like, oh, well, every time like, you bring the stuff that you make an ask and then you don't give me enough time to talk about it. And we need to like work on our like intake and communication. You're pinging me constantly at 9 o'clock at night. And like, I'm putting my kid to bed at that point, and please stop doing that. Those kind of calls, which I don't like, but like you have to have. Maybe you take a little bit of a break because you're going to have to get back on in a couple hours after dinner, because there's maybe another set of calls that are happening in Asia as they're waking up. And that's sort of the challenges of working in a global company or working with teams that are spread across the globe. So you take a little break and you go for a hike or a run or something, and you come back and you spend some time with family, and then you got maybe one or two more evening calls where you're kind of doing the same thing depending on what you're working on. And those aren't every day, but sometimes you got a long day like that. And so that would be a day in the life. Maybe I'm probably missing some stuff, but
Long
uh,
day
long day.
and a
Yeah.
lot of meetings. Interesting to hear you break it down. Thanks for going through that. Of a lot of them are internal calls with your teams of updates or getting feedback as opposed to externally with different customers per se. And so what do you like about the job and find challenging? You mentioned there are a lot of management challenges, but what are some positives as well?
You're always learning something new. And I think that's like one of the advantages of being at a larger company, because if nothing else, you're learning a little bit more about the company in any given day. You're meeting somebody, or you're learning a little bit more about what some functionality or discipline within the company does, whether that's engineering, whether that's product management, whether that's research, whether that's somebody in design. You're just learning every day. There's something you're going to have to do that's a little bit different from what you had to do the week before, and you have to think about that. And maybe it's something as mundane as tooling. Like today, I'm trying to figure out how to put a freaking checklist into some terrible work tracking tool. But at least I'm like, it's like, well, I mean, it will be helpful if we get this checklist in. And so I'm learning a lot about how to incorporate checklists into work. I'm learning a lot about work tracking, Heidi. This year is the year of work tracking and organizational challenges. And so, but that's kind of interesting because it brings up all of these organizational problems. A lot of this isn't new. So there's a lot of existing thinking that's been done about this. And so if you are interested in learning, it's a job where you're going to learn something new every day. And there's no one way to write anything. And so in terms of the core competencies of the work, it's never done until we run out of time. That's usually the way it works, is like deadlines sort of force us to be done. There's always another way you could rewrite things. There's always another exploration you can make. There's always another experiment you could do, or some experimentation between different kinds of content that might resonate more with customers as opposed to some other shade of content. And you don't know. Like, you don't know until you do something. And so you're going to fail a lot. And in failing, you learn things and you have to do it again. And so I think that's the most exciting part of it. I think it being relatively, I mean, now I've been doing this for coming up on 4.5 years or so. So the novelty of the work has worn off a little bit, but it's still new for me. There's always stuff I'm learning in the sort of discipline of user experience design and user experience writing. And that's thrilling too, just like learn a whole new field on the fly, which I think you can do. Like, honestly, I think if you've got the core competencies of being able to ask good questions, if you can learn how to learn well, if you can learn how to give information, learn how to take notes, and have the humility of being willing to say, I don't know. I think that is the biggest career killer, is to think you know everything and have nothing left to learn. That's when you're in trouble. When you start thinking that you've got enough experience and you start being self-referential in terms of how you get your work done, therein lies the path to stagnation. And so humility in the face of the world and your relationship to it is usually the best path for both careers and then, I don't know, life more generally, probably. But I don't know, it's too philosophical.
Philosophy major coming out. And
Yep.
then for 2 questions on advice. First,
Okay.
keep general advice, and then we'll dive
Okay.
more into this specific path that someone wants to follow. But from your winding path from the PhD to now, do you have any general career advice? You mentioned earlier informational interviews and how helpful that was for you. Anything else?
I mean, on the general level, um, this is me looking back, and I'm very goal oriented and I've always been very driven. The things I regret is not spending more time thinking about where I was in that particular moment. So wherever you're at, make sure you balance the drive and the goals that you have for the future with the time that you have in the moment. There is, I don't know if you ever listened to the musical Rent. I'm dating myself a little bit by talking about this, but there's no other moment than now, right? And so make sure that while it's very good to have goals that give you meaning and give value to your life, that you're not doing everything at the expense of the current moment that you're living in. So make sure that you're giving yourself time to enjoy what you're doing. And don't be so focused on the future that you're always grinding and grinding and grinding, hustling and hustling and hustling with a goal towards some end, right? To some end. Don't always be so focused on the end you want to get to that you don't take some time to look around at where you happen to be. Because it's in looking around and observing things too that are going to be the sort of inputs for creativity that you're going to need to be able to apply whenever you get to where it is that you want to go. So like, make sure you are observing what's around you and taking in and trying to absorb as much as you can. And then, set meaningful goals, right? So set goals that are meaningful to you, not meaningful to other people. And if they're not exciting to you, it is okay to quit those goals and do other things. So maybe you wanted to be when you were 18, maybe you wanted to be a executive of a media company. Maybe that was the goal. Maybe you wanted to work in Hollywood. And then you try to learn a little bit about that and you find it's not that exciting to you, but you keep on going after it because that was your goal. But at that, like, maybe that's not it. It's okay to quit things and to you don't know until you start doing something really that is something that's going to be of interest to you. So that would be willing to quit stuff, I think, would be another goal, or another thing that I would give as someone who held on tenaciously to stuff that maybe I should have walked away from a little bit earlier. So I don't know, those are my off the cuff, like, general thoughts. Balance time with the future and time with the present. Be willing to walk away from things and to just alter course. If you're on a failing course of action, there's nothing wrong with admitting like, hey, I don't think this is working out. Maybe I should do something else. And if you're having those thoughts, that's okay. Doesn't mean that you're a bad person or did a bad job. It might just mean that it's not the right thing for you, or not the right thing for you now. And that's, I think, something I wish I could tell myself 20 years ago.
And then for advice specific to your current role, someone says, well, content design actually sounds super cool, user experience. What specific advice would you have for someone who wants to get into that role?
Yeah. I think um, it's it is it is tough right now. I would say, like in this particular moment, if you were interested in doing this, because I think people have discovered it, and now there's lots of people who are pivoting into it. What I would suggest is one, patience. Um, don't throw all your eggs into one basket in terms of trying to get a job. Like don't necessarily. I just here I am contradicting myself. Like be willing to quit things, and I'm like, well, don't quit. Don't make sure you have health insurance. um, as someone who didn't have health insurance for a little bit, I'll tell you it's good. It's good to have. So what I would say is talk to people who are in that field, make connections. So ultimately, like every career path, it looks like it's a set of jobs in a discipline, but it's constructed of actual people. So reach out to those people, try to be like, hey, I'm curious of this work. What does it look like? Would you be at all interested if I were to, like set up a 15 to 30-minute call with you just to tell me, to have a conversation about like, what this work is and what this role is like? Most people are easily flattered and will be willing to talk. You probably learned this in Careers Explained. When you ask someone to talk about their career and their life, usually they say yes. And so just put yourself out there in terms of having those conversations, and those will be the conversations that will help orient you around the things you could do. There are any number of ways or classes or tutorials or credentials you can sign up for to get. And a lot of people do those. And a lot of people are kind of coming from a different career path and trying to get into UX design or UX writing. And you see a lot of those applications as a manager. And they help. Like you will learn the core skill sets. But it's a matter of figuring out how you get that role and land that job. And so I think persistence, talking with lots of people, that sort of core networking, and all networking is just having a coffee with people and talking with them. That's networking. It's nothing to, networking sounds so jazzy and like an agent. But ultimately, I think just building your relationships with people in the field will make it easier for you to have, like, for when opportunities present themselves, you'll be a little bit higher each time you try. And so I think persistence, um, and patience and building human connections and finding opportunities to build those connections, and that will bring opportunities. So I think build on what you already have, the relationships you already have. Who do you know? Who do you know who knows somebody, and they can connect, they can maybe put you in contact with folks, and then just work from there and just get closer and closer and inch your way through. um, and the knowledge itself and the skill sets you'll figure out, and you'll learn what you need to learn. But that would be my advice, is to try to have more conversations with people that are in the field itself.
Awesome. That's great advice. And I got lucky enough to have you on because I happen to know one of your friends. So to your point, people can connect you.